We are talking at a very tough time just after the incident in Memphis, Tennessee. Five black police officers that were thrown off the force and now facing some serious charges regarding the killing of Tyre Nichols. I watched the video and boy, it was awful. It was just
It
awful to
was
watch.
horrific. I have to tell you, I was down at a conference on, some policing technology and all that I attended, and the chief there, they were already talking like major city chiefs about how bad the video was. Nobody had seen it, but they were kind of saying they fully expected it to be horrible. So there was a lot of forewarning, both within the profession and certainly outside. They started telling people expect, how bad this is going to be. So we were all braced for the worst, but it actually was worse than what I could have imagined. Even though I was braced like everyone else for the worst, then you see it, and I watched it, multiple times because I was asked a lot about, tactics and different things. And it really was just gut wrenching and horrific to see and very perplexing. I still think there's more to the story. I'll be interested to hear what happens as they do further investigation.
Well, tell us as you watched it, what did you see? What did you think? What did you feel?
Well, I watched it, the first time through and just really couldn't believe what I was seeing. I had to watch it a second time just to make sure, to count, what was happening there. Some things, it was just such a horrific lack of consideration, lack of concern for human life. It really is shocking. I mean, they handcuffed him, they held him up, and then they were just throwing haymakers in his face, kicking him, and I just have never seen anything quite like that. I mean, people kept saying it was akin to Rodney King. I think it was actually worse than Rodney King personally. And so I was really just shocked and dismayed. And the fact that they were African American officers felt like a double whammy if you want to know the truth about it. I mean, here I have been, many chiefs and others have been real proponents of having diversity in the department. We really want to make sure that the department reflects the community that it serves, because we believe that's going to help. That you, as a person of color, as a Black person or other minority, you will have empathy, you will understand, and so to see that not play out like the way that it did was gut wrenching, on many levels, especially for us who are people of color or Black people in law enforcement. It would be upsetting under any circumstances, that, but it
Right.
just added like a little extra, you know, salt in there in the wound, so to speak, to see that. And so,
One of the things that was kind of interesting to me was that they keep mentioning the Scorpion team
yes.
Scorpion unit. Yeah.
unit. Yeah, what is that? I mean, do a lot of law enforcement agencies have these special teams? But what particularly was this team about?
Yeah, well, I can't remember the exact acronym at this moment, but I know that the team was assembled, in the within the last few years, a couple of years, to really target high crime areas. They were particularly, my understanding is, focused on car prowls and other violent crime and gang activity. It is not unusual for departments to have these types of teams. I mean, Seattle had an anti-crime team as well, and other teams. I mean, I myself was over the narcotics unit, and they are also plainclothes units. So it's not unusual to have teams like that work on specific problems. These type of teams, typically are looking at like hotspot crime areas and whatever's going on. So there could be, human trafficking or drug dealing or a prolific car prowler or something like that they're looking for. And, a patrol officer, what patrol resources are like. Those cops are going call to call to call. There's already a, big controversy about response times because there's just not enough cops to answer all the calls for servers that come in. So you create these specialty teams that can work on those prolific problems and ultimately help, augment patrol officers. I'll take, a moment just to say, in my view, I mean, this is me after, I've retired and spent a lot of years, in policing and talking to a lot of people about it. I think that there's a place for the teams. I know they had to disband the unit in Memphis, and I could easily see why under these circumstances they need to take a halt and a refresh. But there's a place for those units, but everyone in it has to be thoroughly vetted, and there has to be extreme supervision and accountability, and they have to have a mission. It can't be you just send a bunch of cops out there and say, hey, we want you to bring us stats and data, and go find crime. It's not like that. It needs to be focused, targeted, with the mission, with the supervisor, with the game plan, so that you can really be effective, but you don't have people go rogue, and the culture, they say culture eats strategy for breakfast, but culture eats policy for breakfast too, right? So the culture that can get developed if you're not paying very close attention is, it can be very dangerous and bad for other cops, bad for the department, and bad for the public. Yeah. So I think that's what we saw here.
You managed through the last big event, right? I mean, there was compound in Seattle, the CHOP and Black Lives Matters and all the other stuff. Do you think this is lit a fuse? Do you think this is the same, or what's different about this time?
Well, there's a few things that there obviously are some real similarities, because we have yet another unarmed Black man killed by police, right? In this case, the officers all happen to be the same race as the Black man, they all happen to be African-American officers. And also in this case, the police chief, C.J. Davis, quickly moved to terminate their employment, did it publicly, was very transparent about what was happening there, moved that case along to the prosecutor's office. So within about 2 weeks or so, they were fired and they were charged and they were in custody. Now, I know they've bailed out since then, but that is almost unprecedented alacrity or swiftness with moving toward a just end.
By the way, the name of this particular unit, it was called a Scorpion unit. It was a specialized unit known as Street Crimes Operations to restore peace in our neighborhoods, which obviously didn't do that. It was launched in 2021 to reduce violent crime and the number of violent hotspots in the city. Interesting, and I'm reading from an NPR story here. They also quote Sue Rahr, the former sheriff of King County, who was on Barack Obama's task force on 21st century policing, and she said that specialized squads can develop an aggressive culture, which you have noted here, Chief, that sees their work as kind of a war where everybody in the neighborhood is the enemy. And I know in reading some of the other criticisms of this unit or some of the analysis that I heard from others, that they were talking about the officers here not having a lot of experience and being a part of this yet. But it's obviously they got out of control.
Well, without a doubt, right?
Yeah.
So certainly, there's a propensity that can happen under any circumstance. You know what I mean? Without good supervision and good vetting. That's what I meant when I said vetting. Who's in the unit? What's their experience level? What's their age? All these things that have to be considered before we would bring people into the narcotics unit. We did the same thing because you're working in highly volatile situations. You want to make sure you keep your cool at all times and you're thoughtful about what you're doing. Typically in those units, though, the people who are plainclothes are not making arrests or doing anything like that. They're usually, working undercover things and that sort of deal. These other units, the folks are making arrests. And while you want to judge them by productivity, you don't want to make that so important that they are maybe enticed to push against the line. You know what I mean? So you have to be really, really strategic and thoughtful when you're deploying these types of units. And I say that, but I say that people can be. You can be thoughtful. You can have units that are there really to help work on problems that have been identified by the neighborhood and work with the community on those problems, right? You need to know that they're out there and what they're doing.
Right. Well, just to step back a little bit, I mean, this case is going to run its course. I mean, it's in the process. But to back up further, it's like, it just seems to be, and I don't know if it's just the press or social media, but it seems like America has become just more violent. I mean, now that you're out of the mix, out of the stew, so to speak, and you can get a global view on it, is the country actually more violent, or are we just more aware of it? Are we reporting it more?
Well, they haven't reached the highest levels like they had in the in the late 80s and early 90s, but certainly it's trending up from where it was, in almost all major cities. There's a couple places where it's not, but generally speaking, yes, violent crime is rising. And also we have we just have an environment where there's a lot more polarized political views, and because of that, hate crimes have gone up and other things are affected by, the sort of the polarization that we're seeing in many quadrants.
In the 80s and 90s, you said it was higher then.
Yes.
What fueled that I guess the violence in that time, and what curbed it?
Well, a lot of looking back has been done about, they added, believe it or not, they added more officers, they provided more training, they got better equipment, all of these things that helped better generally policing and policing efforts. It's never been perfect. We all know that. But I think that they were trying to improve it from where it had been before and really tried to professionalize what they were doing, started taking more data, more statistics, and being more evaluative about what kinds of responses policing were providing in neighborhoods. And by and large, it drove numbers down, and community policing was a big part of that,
But what was fueling the crime and the violence on a societal level?
Why people were committing crimes?
Why was it so violent then? Was it drugs related or poverty related?
We definitely had a little bit of everything, a little bit of both of those things. It's never one thing. If it was one easy thing, we'd have fixed it by now. But sometimes it's just economic environment. Sometimes it's a drug crisis. We had the crack cocaine at one point was a crisis. Now we have another crisis, of course, with methamphetamine in some areas, heroin in others, and in Seattle, both are really affecting.
Fentanyl too.
Fentanyl,
yeah, all of it. So those things also contribute to the rise in crime. It's not very popular. People don't like to hear it, but often people, and this is just the truth of the matter, who are struggling through addiction, and not able to support themselves, they do resort to crime to support their habits. It happens. So all of those things can contribute to a higher level of crime rates.
Well, mental illness, I think, is another issue as well. And I think we're seeing that in the shootings that mass shootings that we've experienced lately, which until this incident in Memphis was really kind of at the top of the list of what people are talking about, and still continues to be. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah,
I guess the thing that struck me about this, couple of things. First of all was, these cops were wearing body cameras, and how could you not know that if you're wearing the cameras and you're taking this kind of action? And yet also it's been reported that other officers at the scene did nothing. The medics that were called in hesitated to provide any care for Nichols. It just seemed out of whack. So out of control and ugly. And then watching the video, what got me was they were actually holding him up and hitting him and striking him. I just trying to comprehend this as to what takes you to that level to commit that kind of act of violence when you're a police officer.
Enrique, I wish I could answer that. I'd never seen anything like that. They literally had a handcuffed person, held them up. And it was just so horrible to see. And so it did make me wonder if there was something more there. So I'd be very curious. And here's the questions I have that I don't have the answer to, but I'm sure people would like, how many complaints have they received? What was the history before the people went into the unit? Were they documenting more uses of force in other places? What was the supervision? Were supervisors there? What was going on within there that people felt so emboldened as to behave like that? Technically on camera, because some of the cameras weren't on, and feel empowered, if you will, to do that, to behave that way. it's unbelievable, really. So then there's a lot of investigation around that. And I would love to know if there was some sort of relationship or if somebody knew somebody beforehand. Or I know that sounds like a little bit of a reach. I know I don't want to engage in speculation and rumor, but they were so quick to just yank him out of the car so violently for apparently no reason. It makes you wonder, well, was he targeted? Did they have some issue with him for some reason?
Right.
Because
Did they know him ahead of time? Yeah.
yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Did they already know him? Because geez, that's just, outlandish. Like from the time they stopped him to the time they yanked him out of the car, it was under 5 seconds. So what could he possibly have done to incite that? And so I keep thinking, was there something else involved? And we won't know until we know, right? I mean, there'll
Right.
be people who ask all those questions that we're asking and delve a little deeper.
Well, and past incidents that we have seen like this seems like it involved white officers versus a black person.
Right.
And in this case, it is black officers involving a black person. I guess, what as a black former police officer and a chief, how do you feel about that? I mean, it just has to be tremendously upsetting.
It's incredibly upsetting, embarrassing. You really, it really makes you take a step back, because there is, like I said earlier, there's always, at least for me, I'll speak on a personal level, I've always believed that we needed to have, more people of color, and, and all across the board in every profession, but certainly in policing, where it can be highly volatile, and building trust with the community is such a inherently important part of being good public safety stewards, that seeing this undermines that whole argument in some ways. It leads to, is this a racial issue? Is it a cultural issue? Is it a combination? How much of each? How could these officers not see this person as a person? Because sometimes you think that maybe if you're not of the same race or whatever, you may have that tendency toward bias, but you are the same color. Your skin color is their skin color. So it certainly would say that it's less about race maybe in this situation, and much more about the culture of their behavior. And so that was a question I would love to have answered, but certainly it makes you more cognizant that maybe there's a lot more that needs to be done across the board.
It definitely puts the focus on police culture and policing in general.
Yeah,
So,
you bet.
So yeah. If you were still chief, I guess, how do you handle this in the ranks?
Well, I think what Chief Dewey's is doing is great. He put out a public statement. He's talked to the officers in the field, and a lot of this is lead by example, and lead by, making sure your supervisors are doing, holding them accountable, to the work that they're required to do. And you just have to address it. I think initially what he did, and what many others have done, because we had sort of a preview, if you will, that we all knew it was coming. Like, they announced the date and the time that the video is going to be released, and it's going to be bad, and the officers have been charged. So all that was sort of handled and already in motion. So that gave chiefs and others the opportunity to reach out to their community members, to talk to them, to the community-based organizations, the affinity groups, and build and make sure we're building rapport and coming in it together, versus having something sort of dumped on everybody as a surprise video, which can make it a lot more volatile. But there was a lot of ramp up to this. They gave people the opportunity to have those difficult discussions beforehand, and like I said, to brace themselves for what was coming. Although you couldn't have predicted what was coming, but you know what I mean? So I think that made a difference.
Well, I think there was a lot of reaction in many quarters of government and elsewhere. I'm on the board of regents at WSU, and Kurt Schultz, our WSU president, put out a statement, regarding his just being shocked by all of this, and I think in many ways people were trying to get ahead of things to ask for calm.
Right.
And we have not, hopefully we'll not see violent reaction to it, but it's tough to say. But the other thing that raises questions is to what kind of police reform do we need to see? And again, which is an ongoing debate in the country.
Yeah.
Are there things that you would like to see done now?
Sure, absolutely. Things that, I've had conversations, as you know, over the last, well, even after I left policing, I still have been, involved in many
Right.
ways. But, some of the things like the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, I actually think there's some really good things in there. I know that they talked about, not having chokeholds. Well, Seattle hadn't had chokeholds in 20 years, right? But what the problem is that we have 18,000 or so agencies across the country, and the rules are not the same for every agency. So while Seattle doesn't allow no-knock warrants and chokeholds, someplace else might, or while someplace else might have some other type of policy, we might not have that policy within our organization. So I really think there needs to be just baseline national standards, and people, all policing is local, and I understand that. But if you know that whether you're in Tennessee or New York or Los Angeles or Ohio or wherever, that, officers aren't going to kick in your door on a no-knock warrant, chances are, because there's not allowed to without really specific, consideration, that the chokeholds aren't going to be allowed, because it's considered deadly force or outlawed or whatever. All the rules being very similar on those types of situations would make it so much more manageable, if you will, to know what's going to happen, so that when something happens in another jurisdiction, and then you talk to your people and they go, we don't do that. Do you know what I mean? And so I think that would be incredibly important. I know a sticking point, and I'm not a politician, but I do know that the sticking point seems to have been the qualified immunity. Personally, I think that, that shouldn't be off the table, but maybe it's off the table while they move the other things forward and then work on that separately. You know what I mean?
That's a term I hear a lot. What exactly is qualified immunity?
Well, really, it's a civil defense. So if you violate someone's civil rights as a government employee, it doesn't have to be a police officer, but, as a government employee, that you have during the course of your job, then you have protections because you're doing it in the course of your job, if it's considered a civil rights violation. But it's a civil offense. It doesn't have anything to do with the criminal offense. Like these officers that are charged with a murder or charged with a crime, that wouldn't fall under qualified immunity at all. So that's what it is there to do. So to protect people from their doing the normal course of duties, for some protection, some personal protection for civil liability.
So what else would you like to see besides?
Yeah, well, some of the things that, I think, one of the things will be making sure, like, we send officers through the academy, and then they go to a field training officer. And then once they're done with the field training officer, then they're out in the field, and their evaluation period. Generally speaking, that's how it works. Every agency is different, but that's generally speaking how it works. I think once people go through the academy and go through their field training, you send them back through just to make sure that everything took the way it's supposed to. You know what I mean?
Right.
Take some real effort to make sure that training is what you really want to see happen. I like the program that Chief Diaz has implemented, and other places are following. Believe it or not, I'll just say openly that I'm certainly have a lot of allegiance and support to Seattle, but they really are leading the way in a lot of ways with this program, where they get officers in early before they even go to the academy and start talking about the culture, the thoughts, the philosophy. You're protectors, you are helpers, you are part of the community. You're not an occupying force. So all that stuff, early on. Then go to the state academy, then come back out and do more training. I think that would really help set the tone, and then really have real strict vetting. Although a lot of places have started that. There's already psychological testing and all that occurs, but real strict vetting about why are you here? What is it? The skill sets that you need to be a compassionate, caring person when you come to the job. And then I would say. That training needs to occur, refresher training, real stringent about that 10-year mark. Because I got to tell you, people come in fresh and bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and you've gone to, your 20th homicide, your 100th domestic violence. You've seen people abuse their children, all sorts of things that you see in law enforcement that are not good. And after about 10 years, it's probably good to take a refresh, give people, just make sure everybody's okay and they haven't become jaded over time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because that's just a natural thing that can happen to people. So I think we did that so that we don't have people that burn out early, that become jaded in the job, or that came in with the wrong perspective. That we're constantly reinforcing good policing. I think that would take us a long way. And of course, we have to engage the community members, because there's going to be no trust if it's not transparent. They don't know what's happening. So I think that's a real critical
It seems to me that this incident is just going to set back the efforts to recruit more qualified law enforcement officers into the profession. Because, if I was looking for a job and had an inclination of joining the police department, I would say, like, what kind of culture am I stepping into?
Yeah.
I mean, how do you answer that? Because it's already hard enough to get people to do it. And when they come in, this is like, I don't want any part of this.
Yeah, Matt, I fear that you might be right, to be honest with you. I mean, I think that it's going to be much more difficult now. And it's already hard. I mean, when you consider the changing workforce that we have, I had a friend who told me they advertised a job at the Department of Justice. It wasn't a policing job, but it was, related to justice stuff. And I think they had 12 applicants. And then they opened it up and said, okay, work from home. And they had 150 applicants. So the expectation of people now going into work post COVID is a lot different. So what do we have to offer in policing? It really has to be a calling now, because you can work from home and maybe have more flexible hours, or you can come into roll call, put on a bulletproof vest or a taser or pepper spray, and work in the elements, and we have to work overtime and all of those things. And so people who do the job, it really is a calling now. I mean, and you're going to have to work much harder and cast that net far and wide to bring in the right culture of folks into the organizations.
What impact will this have on these specialized units, such as the Scorpion unit that they had?
Well, it's been, this is interesting. It's been a subject of conversation for some time now. Back almost 2 years ago now, or a year and a half ago or so, I can't quite remember. I was in the running for the New York commissioner, and one of the things that the mayor had put into place was he wanted to bring back these plainclothes specialized units, and they had been disbanded earlier by the previous commissioner, Dermot Shea, because there were complaints. So I think we all, recognize that without strict scrutiny, without a really strong supervision, these units can have problems, right? And so, but even with that, when you have a city with a lot of crime in certain areas, you do want to have some sort of targeted enforcement, or specialized enforcement, but you just have to make sure that they're doing it right. Some places probably won't have them, because some chiefs are going to say, it's not worth it. It's not worth the potential. But I think if you're really committed to safety, you'll find a way to do it and do it right, and take the time that's needed to make sure that it's right.
Yeah. So what does this kind of all mean for the city of Seattle now? Right? I mean, it still has an image problem. People don't trust the police still in Seattle. I mean, I really don't know what the future holds for Seattle in terms of law enforcement and safety. It just seems like we're holding our own right now. I mean, I was working for the mayor for about 6 months, and I got to see firsthand what was going on, and it's daunting. Where do you think we're at now as a city?
I think Seattle's improving, and I do believe, I'm the optimist here. I think the city is great. Every now and then, to be honest with you, when I felt like things, a little down about my own circumstances or the city's circumstances or whatever was going on, I take a drive around and just look around our beautiful city and our beautiful area. You know, this is my home. I'm born and raised in the Pacific Northwest. You know, drive through Alki when the sun is setting, or downtown, you know, and it's just a beautiful place. You know, it's got some real challenges, and I think personally that it's really improving. I don't feel like it's nearly as daunting as it was in 2020. So we've moved through the pandemic, we've moved through a lot of the, you know, civil unrest issues, and now we can focus more on some of the, you know, really prolific problems of building up, you know, downtown in a post-pandemic environment, and addressing some of the mental health and public safety issues that are, you know, plaguing the city. And I think that the current administration is really taking that on in a good way. I really do.
Are we recovering from the defund the police movement that happened after the protests? Have
Well,
we
it seems,
recovered?
yeah. Well, yeah, I would say it seemed to me like the pendulum was swinging a little bit. And if you look at the political campaign and the landscape, I think it has somewhat. Although, who knows, this incident may set that back, right? You know, something like this may set that back a bit. But it seemed to me, you know, this is my personal opinion, that some of the defund, you know, movement, people have moved away from that, and that was simply a product of, I will say, without trying to say, you know, sound like I told you so type person, but I felt like it was obvious to me that, you know, that if we ran the officers out without a plan for how we were going to, you know, provide public safety, it was going to be a problem. And now people, you know, are complaining because they want to go home, and they have latchkey kids, and they're worried about their, you know, what's going to happen to the children between the school door and the front door, and other issues coming up. And so I think that made people realize that we probably want some more engagement with police officers. We just want to be fair and ethical, you know, and those things, of course, but we do need to have police service. And so I think that that took some of the, you know, wind out of the sails when people realize, hey, we're not feeling as safe all of a sudden, you know?
Yeah, I've got to ask you about related to the protests and CHOP and the reactions and the way the police handled it, and the mayor. There's been a federal judge that issued some sanctions against the city over the deleted text messages during that time, and I think that's still going to play out. What does that mean for you, as who was chief at that time?
Yeah, well, you know, Enrique, the hardest thing for me has been to stand by and, you know, be quiet. But yeah, for me personally, I gave, you know, a sworn deposition. That's on the record. And, you know, while I'm not an attorney, I do listen to my attorney who really told everybody involved, you know, just, you know, to let the process take its course. So that's really the pattern that I'm in right now, you know. And it's never easy, you know, when you see your name out there, but, you know, we have to let those legal processes take their course. But, you know, I'm sure that they'll be, you know, finishing up, you know, in the near future. Then I'll come back and we can talk about it.
All right. We'd like to have you do that. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
You know, I have one more question about potential of what could happen in our cities because of the incident in you know, the recent incident. They brought the officers to justice pretty quickly. I mean, and the elephant in the room for me is a racial element, right? If there were white cops, would that have happened as quickly? I don't know. I mean, because that's a real question I had.
Yeah. You know, you never can know because these are hypotheticals, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I would have to say, and looking at that video,
so you think it's because of just the horrendous nature of the video?
Yeah, that I don't care what race, to see anybody, even, you know, anybody standing a person who's handcuffed up and just laying punches into their face, you're gone. I mean, I think there's a place for that. You know, people, you know, will argue the benefits or the fights with the union or whatever, but you do something that's a clear violation of law, you know, that you need to be fired and terminated quickly. And I hope that this will continue when we see things that are that egregious, when there really is no question about, you know, these guys are charged with second-degree murder, with kidnapping. You know what I mean? These are not people that should be hanging on payroll while they sit in jail. So I think that I think that this The attorney for the victim in this particular case came out and said that it lays the blueprint going forward, and I think that it probably will.
What do you
we've avoided real horrific violence so far, I think in part because of the swift action.
Yeah.
Sorry about that, Nick.
No, actually, I was just going to ask you a question related to that or get your thoughts on this. Is that, I guess, what would you ask for people to do now as particularly the public in reaction to this? Because even the family has asked for people to, to react peacefully.
Yeah, well, I think that's the right thing to do. I think it's also a very sound tactic in many ways, because the minute you start with a bunch of civil unrest and, the pepper sprays flying and the, buildings are burning or whatever it is, it takes away, it becomes a focus, and it takes away from believe it or not, in my view, it takes away from the issue itself. It takes away from the victim and the family and all of that, because now it's all about the demonstrations and and then there'll be loud people and conversations. But when you can really have thoughtful demonstrations, protests that they're out there where people are really putting forth their position, if you will, about what happened and what they want to do forward and how they want to move forward, I think there's a lot more chance for dialogue and for something to get done. Because we've been around a long time, Enrique. I don't know about you, Matt, but
Yeah.
we got a few years on it, and we know, and we've seen these happen before. Mm-hmm. Something happens, crazy outcry, demonstrations, everybody goes ballistic, and then we wait for the next thing somewhere else in the country. So I think we have here a real opportunity when people face it with a level of calm. Anger, you can be angry, but, nonviolent, I think it gives an opportunity for real dialogue to happen. The discussions to get a little deeper. The investigations can get underway, and we can look for overall improvement.
Just a few more things before we move on. So since you left being police chief, you've written a book. Saw you on Dr. Phil.
Yeah.
You work for NBC News, doing really working as a commentator, analyst. Now you're working for Microsoft doing global security. Question is, would you ever come back to policing?
I think about it from time to time. What I mean?
Really?
It is really, and I know it's so funny because I'll think about it and then I'll read the paper, or I'll think about it and something crazy will happen. Or I'll talk to one of my friends who's still chiefs around the country. I'm like, really don't really want to do something like this. But I love, I will say this. I really love, that servant type person, being that servant type person. So it may not be being a police chief or police officer, but I definitely feel compelled to want to give back. It's just something I want to do. And I think some people do have that calling. My grandkids are babysitting, so you might hear them in the background.
That's okay.
They're not babysitting. They're here, and so you know how it is.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. But I think that I feel that need. So I sit on a lot of boards like you do, Enrique, and I'm sure you do too, Matt, and do a lot of community work. Because some of us just really want to do that, right? You just really feel that compelled to try to make a difference.
Right. Well, tell you what, let's see how things go here. And then depending on what happens with this whole issue regarding the text messages and that, we definitely would like to have you come back and talk a bit more about that whole situation, as well as policing and some of the other things that you're doing.
I'd like to hear more about global security.
Yeah, definitely.
I think that discussion will scare the hell out of me.
Yeah. No, definitely want to talk about that. So we'll get a little time and see what happens here. But please come back, okay?
I would love to. Thank you both.
All right. Former Chief, Seattle Police Chief Carmen Best, thanks for taking the time. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Take care.